Hello everyone, welcome to today's lecture of this course of self-knowledge that we are broadcasting every Sunday at the same time through this page. Last Sunday we were introducing this course. We were talking about what self-knowledge is. We were talking about the four pillars of the universal wisdom and how to apply them to get to know ourselves. And if you haven't had the opportunity to see that video, it is recorded here in the page, so you can go and watch it whenever you have the time, so you know what are the bases of self-knowledge, and you can know what this cycle of 50 talks or 50 lectures is going to be about. Everything that we are going to learn here in this course of self-knowledge. Just give me a second so I can share this video. Just give me a moment, so we'll start with today's talk. Just give me a second. Okay, so let's see. The topic that we are going to see today is very interesting because it will give us some clarity on a topic that causes a lot of interest in some people, a lot of curiosity in others, and a lot of fear in some. Today we are going to talk about death. We are going to see what death is, what happened when the person dies, what is the process that this embodied soul goes through when the physical body dies. We are going to see or to try to explain those things that people live when having a near-death experience. We will see also if we really have only one existence or if we live successive existences. And we will even talk today a little about what the famous hell is. So we are going to see what dies and what does not die with the death of the physical body, and everything that we will be talking about can be verified by each of you. And this is the interesting thing about this course, that the information we share is not intended to generate a concept in which to simply believe or doubt. Since next Sunday we will be talking about astral projection. We will teach how to achieve conscious astral projection, and we will see how, with that technique, we can corroborate all this information and many other things for ourselves. If you have any question during this explanation, please write down in the chat, and at the end we are going to share all your comments and we are going to be solving all your questions. So let's start with today's topic. It is necessary to start this lecture by remembering the three parts that make us up, because if we have it clear, we can get to understand what dies and what doesn't die with the death of a physical body. The first part that makes us up is our physical body. We all know that it is made of matter, and it is our vehicle of manifestation in this third dimension. We saw this in last conference, but we need to remember this so we can get to understand what we are going to be talking today better. The second part that makes us up is our mind or soul. It is made of energy, and it is that internal part in us that comprises the 97% of our consciousness, but that actually is trapped in all our different ways of being, or all our mechanical reactions, our concepts, or our beliefs, our anger, our impatience, our laziness, our pride, our imbalance, our greed, our lust, our envy, our lies, our betrayals, all that, or all those ways of being are conditioning now our energy, which is our soul, which is our mind. And the third part that makes us up is our spirit, or our consciousness. And it is the 3% of free and unconditioned essence. It is the divine part in us. And having reviewed this point, let's start talking about death. Actually, the ignorance about death is the reason why most people are afraid of it. They don't see that death is the final goal or the objective of everything. And we don't see it because we are so fascinated with this physical world, with this third dimension, that we lost our conscious connection with the higher dimensions, where we can perceive the eternity, what is eternal, from which we came and to which we will return. We have lost all memory of what we lived before coming to this new existence, and we believe that the objective of our existence is just to obtain material goods, or to generate good relationships with family and with friends, or to gain a reputation that lasts over time. And we fail to understand that the true objective of existence is none other than dying to be born. But we will understand this as we develop this topic. If a person truly understands what death is, then he wouldn't fear it anymore. And he would then be able to venture into the mysteries of life and death. It's actually to be afraid of death what keep us so controlled, so afraid of investigating those things that we just don't understand, or that are far from that physical things that we can perceive with our 5 physical senses. Actually, in Eastern culture, they are not as afraid of death as we are in this Western culture. We are very attached to life and very afraid of death because we don't know what happens next. There are many theories, there are many concepts. Some say that after death there is nothing else. And then, because of that, we give free rein to our pleasure, to our desires, because you only live once. And other people say that after death we go to heaven or we go to hell, and that this, even heaven or even hell, is going to be eternal. That's another theory about death. Others say that we die and we are born again, that death is just like a change of dress. But the problem is that since we don't know how to directly verify the truth of those concepts, we settle for simply believing or not believing what seems more logical to us, or what adapts to what we have been taught. And it remains in our mind as an unproven concept we are very sure of. For that reason, it is very important to start to develop the conscious astral projection, to start doing this kind of research directly with the wise superior parts of our own being. And next Sunday we are going to explain the astral projection and how to achieve it. So don't miss the lecture we're having next Sunday. Let's now see this. Once we leave the absolute, which is that source, or you can call it God, from which we all come from where everything come, and we come to this physical manifestation, we have 3,000 opportunities to create a soul going through a process of evolution through the different kingdoms of nature. And upon reaching the human kingdom on each of those 3,000 cycles, we have the right to 108 human physical bodies. So if we calculate 3,000 cycles per 108 existences with physical body, that means that we will go through physical death 324,000 times, so that in one of those opportunities we decide to awaken our consciousness. We decide to achieve the self-realization of our being, and to get out of that mechanism of death and rebirth, of evolution and involution, that is called the wheel of samsara. Actually, later on we are going to be talking about that in detail, about evolution, about involution, and about the wheel of samsara. And it is important, of course, that we check through the astral projection, as I was saying, if there are successive existences. So we don't get, or we don't say, or we don't keep only the theoretical information, that we get to verify that we astrally unfold ourselves and ask our own being to show us if really there are successive existences, and very important to investigate this, in which existence of those 108 we currently are. We can be shown 108 candles in the astral world, and all the candles that are, you say that? With fire. Sorry, I forget how to say that. That are lighted, whatever, are the existences that you already lived, and the ones that are not lighted or off, well, whatever, sorry, are the ones that are left, that remain left. So if you only see two that are unlighted, let's say, it means that you are currently in your life 106. That is a way they can show you. Actually, your own being can give you the exact number. It is different in everyone. But what is the same is that are 108 existences per each cycle, and that we have 3,000 cycles to achieve self-realization. We can even investigate how many times we have turned in this wheel, that is, in which cycle of manifestation we are. And actually, we could be shown our own gnome, and his beard, and the length of his beard would let us know the answer. We could also, in astral unfolding, see our past lives and understand that our existence is not limited only to this life, but that we have had past lives. It is very important that each one of us take the time and make the effort to investigate that by ourselves. Something that is very interesting to investigate is what happens immediately a person dies, since we tend to believe that when they die, they suffer, or that when they die, they feel pain, or even worse, that when we die, we disappear and we stop being. But when we come to see what death is, we realize three very interesting things. First of all, that death is not the end of existence at all. And the second thing that we realize is that death liberates in all cases. You see that immediately a person dies, feels a relief. Actually, when the physical body dies, the soul frees itself from the body and at the same time frees itself from the pain, from the suffering, and from the heaviness of this physical world. For example, when someone has been ill for a long time with a terminal disease, upon death they receive liberation from that state. Actually, can be a young people, let's say, that died being shot, and actually when just died, don't even recognize that he died. He just like felt to be shot and didn't feel the pain because he died right away, let's say. And he stands up and says like, wow, I thought I was dead, but I feel right. And keep walking, just thinking he is alive. Because actually to die is to be to set free of the body, to set free of this third dimension and all its heaviness and all its loss. You can see also that a tired old person may wish to die because of the weight of carrying his own body and his soul for so many years. But regardless of the condition in which you die, death will always be a liberation from this physical, from this heaviness, and from, as I said, all the loss that governs this physical world. Actually, when the person dies, they don't even realize that they have died because what they experience is instant relief, instant liberation. And the third thing that we realize when we are investigating all this is the teaching behind this enigmatic phrase that says the purpose for living is to die. Actually, we don't understand that, but we are going to get to understand this. And we get to understand this because we get to understand that there is not a single type of death, but three. The first one that you can see here is the death of the physical body. We all almost know that death. The second one, well, is called the second death. And the third one is called the psychological death. And now let's see them in detail so that we understand each one of them. Let's first see what is the process of the death of the physical body. It is said that a person has died when a person completely loses his vital signs, when his heart no longer beats, when he gets cold. But it is important to understand that the person hasn't died yet, but enters a state of catalepsy where vital signs are so minimal, so imperceptible that hospital machines cannot measure it. In this state of catalepsy lasts 72 hours, and during this state, the person could come to revive. And it is something other than coma, it is something different. There are many stories of people who have returned from death during that period. And there are many stories of people who were buried alive and their torn coffins or their corpses were found with gestures of despair because they came back and they were already been buried. So it is something that we probably have heard of. And unfortunately, nowadays, almost nobody is aware of the process of death that was formerly known by all the tribes and all the people of the planet, and the dying people actually are being buried alive, or they are adopted before the 72 hours pass. This could be avoided if people would know better the process of death and were not so afraid of it. If we were to respect the old way again, where they usually had a 72 hours funerals. If we do that, this process could be avoided. And after those 72 hours, it can be confirmed that the person died. And what happens during those 72 hours? What is the reason why we must wait 72 hours to bury someone? Well, actually it's because during these 72 hours, the soul of the disembodied goes through 3 judgments, we can call it that, in the following way. The first judgment is made during the first 5 minutes. In this one, the deceased person goes through a conscious retrospection of each one of its deeds in his existence. You have probably heard people who have had near-death experiences that say that they saw their life pass like a movie in front of them, and that then they saw a tunnel and they saw a light at the end of that tunnel. Actually, it is because of this first judgment. That tunnel they see is our spine. And as our essence goes up from this third dimension, which in us has its base in our sexual center, that represents the earth in us, to the superior dimensions where the judgments take place, and the light they claim to see are those higher centers that in us represent that so known as heavens. Actually, we will understand this that I'm trying to explain now more in when we see topic number 5, where we will talk about the dimensions and where they are in us. All of this that the disembodied is living is in an astral form. So the person sees a movie of his life in retrospection, scene by scene, until he reaches his own birth. And what for? We need to know that we are here in this planet, and that this planet is for us, for our souls, a school. And here we come to get wisdom, to learn about from everything we live. So this first judgment is to settle what we lived and compare it with what we have lived before, and compare it with the goal that we set for this new existence. So here we are going to be clear about the good and the bad acts of our existences, because our learning, or we get to learn from the good and from the bad. So this retrospection is so you cannot tell you didn't do that, so you are totally sure. And the second objective of this first judgment is to compare the lived existence with the plan that was had for it. So to see or if you met your goal. Every person before birth brings a plan for his existence. For that reason, it is extremely important that we start to ask ourselves, to dig into our own consciousness to find the answer to the question, what is the purpose of my existence? Because it's really very sad to come to existence and spend all the time that we live so absorbed in the trivialities of this world, so absorbed in work, in problems, in pleasures, in distractions, that we don't take time to ask ourselves, what did I really come here for? And let another existence pass without achieving this purpose. Before, it was heard that certain people realized that a person had died because they saw him retracing. That is, that in the places where that person had lived, the person could be seen or could be felt. Let's say, I felt like that person was here. I think he is like retracing. I think he's dead. And this was because before, as people were more present, they were not as distracted by so many things as we are now. They had the ability to perceive things more. They had that ability more latent. Actually, all these processes of death were better known in the past, and that is why people used to respect the time required for the deceased to pass these processes correctly. This first judgment is made by our own conscience. The second judgment it is made 24 hours later. And this soul is brought in presence of the regents of the divine law, which are self-realized masters, 100% conscious, and in this judgment, in the second one, two things will be considered. The first one is the weight of our defects. For example, my aggressiveness, my violent self, will be weighted to see if it has increased or decreased in relation to my previous existence. They will weight, like, for example, my pride, my lust, my laziness, my tyranny, my selfishness, and so on. And they will compare it with the weight these defects had in my previous existence to see how much they have increased or decreased. It is common, actually, if we do not work on ourselves, for the atomic weight of our defects to increase from one existence to another, because we spend it totally identified. We spend it fascinated with this world, and we let that all those defects constantly steal our energy. Every time we let them manifest through us. So every time I let, for example, my anger to manifest, and I yell and I hurt, my anger is feeding on my energy, and it is increasingly difficult for me to eliminate it, to stop being like that. So actually, it is increasing its atomic weight, and so I am carrying more and more irate. The second thing that is going to be judged in the second judgment are the amount of the defects. That is the number of defects that we have. As we act unconsciously, we are constantly creating new defects. For example, in past lives, we didn't have some defects related to technology. For example, the ones related to social networks, or for example, the defects in us that lives wasting lots of our time and lots of our energy checking other people's life through Facebook, or watching series on Netflix, or watching videos on YouTube. As we have been giving them a lot of energy, they are created and they grow for the energy we lose in them. And now they keep us like enslaved. So now we need to be all the time with the cell phone in our hand, all the time checking our notifications, all the time watching another episode. In that, I cannot like stop doing that because I already create a defect inside myself related to the social networks, related to the social media, etc. And those are new defects that we are creating. All defects are, for example, laziness, the defects that likes to party, the defects like angry, the pride, the greed, and all their details. So those are like all defects. And actually, this is the second judgment, to compare the weight and the quantity of the psychological elements with the ones that the disembodied had at the end of his previous existence, in order to determine whether this increased or decreased. Sorry. And that is the second judgment. And approximately after 48 hours, the soul of the dead is taken to the tribunal of the objective justice. This court is made up of Anubis and the 42 judges of divine justice. And actually, this is the most important judgment because the deeds will be seen here, if they were good or bad. Intentions are not worth it here, because I can have very good intentions and do nothing. I can, and it is said that with good intentions, the road to hell is paved. So in this judgment, three things are going to be judged. The first one are good deeds. Those are the acts of charity and the conscious act that we made. Charity is the times we help someone, when we gave food, when we gave shelter, or the times that we help someone financially or emotionally, when we gave some physical help in a disinterested way, either to a person or to an animal. And the conscious acts are the times that we did something to help someone to awaken consciousness. Both acts of charity and conscious acts are good deeds, but we need to know that conscious acts are more valuable, because if we do a charity for someone, we are helping that person for a short moment of their existence. On the other hand, if we teach that person to eliminate hatred, to eliminate resentments, laziness, greed, and to use wisely their inner wealth, that is, their sexual energy, so that they can get out of this wheel of constant death and rebirths and can reach the goal of their existence, we are giving them a tool that can transform their life, that can transform their existence completely. And for that reason, the conscious acts are more valuable than the charity, even though charity is very, very good. And the second thing that is going to be judged here are the bad deeds. And these are all the times we let our psychological defects to act instead of our consciousness. How many times did I lie? Did I fornicate? Did I hurt someone? All our bad deeds will be taken in consideration in this third judgment. We can see this judgment represented in the Egyptian painting, known as the Judgment of Osiris, that we have here, that represents the soul of the disembodied being carried by Anubis before the court of divine justice. And we see here, we can see a scale where the heart is being weighted on one side, and on the other is the the pen of truth, and the forgot the name of that. Okay, and bad deeds add weight to our heart, and good deeds make our hearts lighter. And this judgment will be carried out by those 42 judges, 21 of whom will be in favor of the disembodied, and 21 will be against, to guarantee a fair judgment. And the third thing that is going to be measured here is the fire on his spinal cord. If the person worked on supersex, making his sexual energy, which is the kundalini, ascend through the spine, that is going to be measured in that third judgment. At the end of this process, a verdict will be given based on the results of those three judgments, and this will determine various things. The first thing that is going to be determined is the karma that this soul will endure in its next existence. So there it will be determined if the person in his next life will suffer from such diseases, or will come with such favorable or unfavorable physical conditions, or if the person will face such situation, if we'll have that many partners, that many children, and the things that will suffer with them, the events and beneficial or pleasant situations that you will live according to the dharma of the person. So according to the karma and the dharma, they will determine the things you will live in your next existence. There will be determined all the karmic situations that the person will have to live as a result of their bad actions, so that we can learn from our mistakes, because we will see that things never seem so bad when we do them to others than when they do it to us. But also, it's not all bad. The favorable situations that will be experienced will be determined here, such as that at some point in our existence, our next existence, by dharma, we will receive the knowledge of the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness, so that we can awaken, so that we can revolutionize our consciousness and do our inner work. Also here in this verdict will be determined the electropsychic design of a new personality, so that karma can be collected. Let me explain that. For example, if a person tyrannized others in his past existence, by karma he must be someone tyrannized in his next existence, and for this he will come with a submissive personality, so he can be tyrannized. So we all come into each existence with a pattern, with an electropsychic design, according to which our personality is going to develop. If it's going to be a shy personality, or if it's going to be an outgoing personality, or if we are going to have a personality with a tendency to anger, or with a tendency to intellectualism, or with a tendency or with leadership capacity, or with low self-esteem, or with a tendency to lust, etc. Also, in our electropsychic design, the zodiac sign, according to which we are going to be born, that's the date and time of our birth, is marked, and all this will be combined in that we develop a certain way of being, certain personality that will allow all the karmas that we have pending to be charged to us. We are going to see that only with inner work can we free ourselves from all those conditionings that were imposed on us by the mechanics of life. All that will be done if the soul is entitled to a new existence. If he hasn't exhausted his 108 existences yet, and that if he must be born again. And at the end of these judgments, Anubis will commence the angel of death to cut the silver cord, which is that cord that joins our soul to our physical body, and that can only be cut when the angel of death cuts it with the ray of death. But before doing this, the angel of death has to ask permission from the divine mother of this person. So at the end of it all, it is the divine mother of the person who determines whether it is really time to disincarnate the person or not. If the divine mother of the person consider that there is that there are still things that the person must live, or that the person must experience or fulfill, or if she decides to give him another opportunity to achieve the purpose of his existence, then the person would return to the physical body before those 72 hours. As I was saying, unfortunately, at this time, almost everyone is unaware of these processes that were formerly known to all the tribes and people of the planet. And now the dying people are being buried alive or autopsied within 72 hours. If people knew better about the death process and were not so afraid of it, with a 72 hours wake, it would be avoided. On the other hand, if the angel is authorized by the Divine Mother, then he cuts the silver cord with the ray of death, and this process could take up 24 more hours. Then, when these 72 hours has passed, it could be said that the person has already really disincarnated. Now, it could be said. And once the angel of death has done his job, three alternatives await to the disembodied. The first alternative is given if the person has not yet exhausted his 108 existences. For example, that the person goes through existence 95 or 106 or 107 and still has another opportunity to try his self-realization in that cycle. In that case, his soul will be taken to a region that is known as limbo, that is in caverns submerged inside the planet Earth, but in the fifth dimension, where the disincarnate will project all his life and will continue there with the consciousness asleep, believing that he is alive and repeating the same actions he did when he lived. If we astrally unfold and we have the opportunity to visit a deceased relative, for example, who has not yet been reborn, we will find him in that place repeating the same things he did while living, totally convinced that he is alive. And we can tell him that he's dead, but they don't believe us. And soon they return to their dream. Hence, the importance of awakening consciousness, because that is just our current state. we go to sleep and we go to that other plane, and we are not aware of being outside our body, but we project all our desires, all our thoughts, all our emotions. We see that we spend like the whole day identified with work or with housework, and we dream of working or of doing housework or any other of our daily activities, and we are totally convinced that we are awake even though incredible things happen to us. We are not able to make ourselves aware um, of being outside of the physical body. And when we return to the body, we remember these experiences as dreams. Likewise, just likewise, when we die, if we don't work on ourselves, if we don't make the effort to wake up, we will go to that other plane, we will go to limbo to wait for a new physical body, totally asleep, without realizing that we have died. The 3% of our consciousness is only awakened to attend to these judgments, and then again we return to our normal dormant state. In limbo, we will be waiting for the necessary conditions to be met, so we can return to existence in a new physical body, and we do it that totally unconsciously. So all the time repeating our lives, thinking and believing that we are alive. The second alternative is given if the person has completed his 108 existences, and that when measuring the fire on his spine, Anubis finds that he had not awakened and he hadn't raised the sacred fire through his spine. In that case, it is ruled as dried reed, and the verdict is to be sent to the abyss. There, this character, let me see if I find it here. Let me see here. This character here that is known as the devourer of the souls, and is also known as Typhon, who is in charge of directing the souls towards involution, all the souls that didn't raise, that already completed his 180 existences, and that didn't raise their sacred fire. He is in charge to direct them to involution, and he will take this soul to be submerged in the infra dimensions of planet Earth, where it will experience what is known as the second death, which we will explain next. And the third alternative is given if the person worked with the sacred fire and increased its level on his spinal cord, whether he is in his 108 existences or not. If he's in 106, 108, it doesn't matter. If he raised his sacred fire, Anubis and the divine mother of this soul will take him on what can be called vacations on heaven, and there his divine mother will give him strength and instruction so that in his next existence or in his next physical body, the soul can work towards the self-realization of its being. So even if the person just lived his existence number 108, if he worked on himself and if he increased his sacred fire and the level of his sacred fire on his spinal cord, he could be entitled to an existence 109 to try to fulfill his work. But even this process of evolution and even this process of heaven, they are not eternal. they could seem eternal. The involution could be seen eternal, but actually they are not. They are only a process the soul has to go through and needs to return to a new existence or to a new cycle in this physical manifestation. And this is all the process that the soul lives when the physical body just dies. We can appreciate that it is a process very similar to the one we go through every night when we go to sleep, with the difference that the soul is released from the physical body, is released from this third dimension at the time of cutting the silver cord. And that's the same process we live when we are sleeping. Our soul goes out from our physical body, but we always return because of our silver cord that joins the physical body to our souls. And that was the explanation of the death of the physical body. If you have any questions to this point, please write it down, and at the end we will be checking on all your questions. Now let's talk a little about the second death. The second death is what awaits the souls of people who exhaust their 108 existences without awakening their consciousness. As I explained, our soul is contaminated by all our psychological defects, and those are the ones which don't allow our consciousness to awaken. And if we don't decide to do a work on ourselves and to voluntarily eliminate each of our defects to free the essence that is trapped within each one of them and make us send this liberated essence through our spine, raising our sexual fire so that essence can be awakened in these higher centers, becoming into consciousness. If we don't decide to do this work, when we've exhausted our 108 senses, we'll have to go through a process of involution through the 9 Dantian circles, where nature will disintegrate each of the defects that we were creating and feeding through successive existences. Each psychological defect will die in its law. It means that you will have to repeat countless times in a process that will seem like an eternity, but it's not. That which you find until the pleasure that used to generate from having done these actions so many times and having to repeat it and being forced to continue doing it for a long time, it becomes such a terrible pain that the defects ends up disintegrating and the trapped consciousness is released. But unfortunately, without having rescued the wisdom and the love that is rescued when we do the work of disintegration of our psychological defects voluntarily in one of our 108 existences. We are going to pass through all the 9 Dantian circles that are divided in the sphere of moon. There are defects of laziness will be disintegrated. The sphere of Mercury, and then our defects of fornication will be disintegrated. Our the sphere of Venus, and there are defects of pleasures. It will be disintegrated. The sphere of Sun, and there are going to be disintegrated our defects of imbalance, of greed. And the sphere of Mars, where our defects of angriness are going to be disintegrated. In the circle of or the sphere of Jupiter, there all our defects of tyranny will be disintegrated. The sphere of Saturn and there all our violent defects will be disintegrated. And the sphere of Uranus, there are defects of betrayal, now of lie, and our defects of betrayals will be disintegrated in the sphere of Neptune. Once the last defect is disintegrated, in a process that could take thousands of years, the purified essence comes out and will have lost another soul. Then that clear spark will begin a new cycle. Remember that we are entitled to 3,000 cycles of manifestation, where it will be able to create a new soul going through the different kingdoms of nature, with the possibility that upon reaching the human kingdom, it will decide in one of its 108 existences as a human to work on itself and to achieve self-realization. That is the second death, and it is the way in which our essence manages to free itself from the ego if we don't decide to do the conscious work of freeing ourselves. So we can see that even the second death is a liberation process. Now let's talk about the third type of death, which is a psychological death. And it is the most important one, since it is the one that will free us from the death of the physical body, and it will free us from the second death. But in addition, it will free ourselves from suffering, from misery, and from the constant slavery to which all our different ways of being have subjected us. If we need to realize that we have within ourselves millions of psychological defects that lead us to make mistakes, that lead us to hurt others, and even to hurt ourselves, and that don't allow that we can awaken our consciousness. Every time that we let one of these ways of being manifest in us, it steals our energy, and that leads it to grow more and more, and to gain more power. And because of that, it will gain more control over us. For example, if for a long time we have allowed ourselves to have states of anger, of impatience, fights, intolerance, and resentments, the defect of anger will grow to the point that it will have control over us for a longer time. And we will get to define ourselves as an angry person. The same we can see with, for example, sadness. If we constantly let pessimistic thoughts, feelings of desolation, anguish, and bitterness to manifest in us constantly, that defect will grow until we become constantly depressed people. The same goes for all defects, such as drugs, such as lust, such as pornography, adultery, envy, criticism, greed, theft, violence, etc. The more energy that a defect has trapped, the more it can enslave us. And as we can see here, our physical body belongs to the third dimension, while our psychological defects inhabit the fifth dimension, where we find our thoughts and our emotions. They take our human machine by making us feel a desire, by making us feel this desire in the emotion, and then the justification in our mind, so we let them manifest in us, and to commit mistakes by wrongly acting, by wrongly feeling, by wrongly speaking, and by wrongly thinking. The seeds of our ego are laziness, greed, pride, wrath, gluttony, and envy. But these in turn are subdivided into thousands of manifestations that are expressed in us through the different energetic centers of our human machine. You can see them here. To feed on our energy. In each of these psychological defects, in each one of them, a small portion of our essence, of our consciousness is trapped, which is what gives life to the defect. So the defect of laziness has trapped the consciousness of, or the virtue of diligence. Our lustful self has the virtue of chastity trapped. Anger has trapped gentleness. Envy has trapped our capacity to be, or the philanthropy. Our pride has our humility trapped. Our autonomy has our balance trapped, and so on. When a physical, psychological defect dies, then the trapped spark of essence gets released. For that reason, by eliminating our defects, there will be an awakening and a development of our consciousness, and we will start to become more and more virtuous and more conscious. But we must consider that we don't have one, but millions of psychological defects. There are all kinds of defects inside of us. We have anger, impatience, irritability, greed, ambition, worry, deceit, lie, fear, jealousy, lust, fornication, adultery, vanity, conceit, pride, bad will, discouragement, self-sympathy, self-consideration, swearing, idleness, cheating, splurge, alcoholism, drug addiction, degeneration, gluttony, envy, etc., etc., etc. And as Virgilio, that was the poet from Mantua, said, even if we had a steel plate in 1,000 tongues, we will not be able to totally enumerate them. But it is also important to know that if one psychological defect can be eliminated, all the defects can be. If we can set free one spark from the darkness, we can set free all of them. Give me just a minute. Okay, so what is psychological death? That is, as I was saying, very important. But what it is? Psychological death consists of 3 simple steps. The first one is self-observation. The second one is to judge until we get to comprehend. And the third one is the elimination. Just give me a second. Sorry. The first thing we must do is start to observe ourselves. For that, we need to make a constant effort for being into the here and now, living the present moment, living inside of our body, and not there where thoughts and our feelings constantly take us. Once we are in the here and now, once we are observing ourselves, we are going to discover the defects that want to manifest through us in the form of thoughts, of feelings, of desires, emotions, sensations, words, or actions. At first, when we start doing this exercise, we will see nothing because our capacity for self-observation is asleep. But if we continue making the effort to observe ourselves, we will see that, for example, a thought manifests itself in the mind. Let's say we are self-observing and we figure out that we are thinking about being hungry. We observe a thought that says, okay, I'm like hungry. Just a thought. But happens that we already ate. So we already observed that thought. That is a very simple example. So what is the second step? I already observed that thought. The second step is to judge it using the reflection. So I'm going to ask myself, is this manifesting from my conscience or is from the ego? And I can easily see that it's not my consciousness that is actually my ego manifesting, because I really don't need to it. And then I understand that it is my glutonity defect manifesting itself in me, who wants to be eaten all the time. Then comes the comprehension, when one feels through reflection the need to change that bad habit that brings me problems and complications in health, in this case. Once I understood that this defect must die, we move on to the fourth step, which is the third step, which is elimination. And for this, we are going to ask to the parts of love of our own consciousness, which is our particular Divine Mother, to disintegrate. We mentally ask her, Mother of Mine or Divine Mother, eliminate this defect or kill me this eye. But in addition to having heard the defect in the mind and just touch it and eliminate it, we realize that it also made us feel in our emotional center a desire to eat. So the same, we judge it, we get to comprehend this glutonity, and we ask our conscious to eliminate this in our emotional center. But if we had even gotten up to go get something to eat, so we ask for death to that expression of defect in our motor center. And we continue to observe ourselves, and now, for example, we discover an expression of anxiety that leads us to bite our nails. So what are we going to do? We're also going to judge it and ask for death for that anxiety and for the self that bites its nail when it feels anxious. And by doing this, we will observe how the desire and the anxiety disappear. But the same will apply to everything. Just put this into practice. Observe for yourself to discover your psychological eyes. Discover, for example, your anger. When your breathing accelerates and you feel like yelling at someone, just observe yourself and judge it to get to comprehend that your consciousness, your capacity of remaining in self-control, your patience, and your capacity of loving are trapped within this defect of anger. And then ask for death. For every detail you discover in your mind and in your emotion and even in your own flesh, in your breathing, what you feel in your breathing, in the sensation in your blood. Ask for death for every detail and discover by yourself the powerful effect of this exercise. We are going to practice this to get rid of all our psychological defects, of all our vices, of all our bad habits, and all our wrong ways of them. This is called an ongoing death, be dying in the march. And we need to practice it at every moment, making all our thoughts, all our feelings, all our words, and all our actions pass through the filter of our conscience. of our consciousness, if we really want to become awake and aware. Another example of psychological or of the psychological death practice, so this remains clear for you, could be that, for example, we are walking down the street and we see someone that's attractive to us. So how can we observe ourselves and put into practice the psychological death? Well, we take the attention to our interior. And when we do that, we will discover something interesting. We're going to discover that in our sexual center, that is located right here, we are going to notice an unmistakable sensation, that like sexual sensation. And in our instinctive center, that is right here, you are going to observe that we are feeling attraction to that person. In our emotional center, that we find it here, our lower emotional center, we can observe how we feel like we are in love of that person. We are going to start feeling like those butterflies people say they feel when seeing someone they like. And in our lower intellectual center, we will be able to observe how we start to idolize that person, how we start to fantasize about, I don't know, living with that person, marrying that person, or laying in bed with that person. And in our motor center, we are going to observe how different eyes are compelling us to act, to do something, to talk to that person, to, I don't know, do this to your hair so that person can look at you, etc. And that is self-observation. And what do we have to do once we observe all that moving inside of us? We need to judge it. We need to reflect. We need to reflect and to ask ourselves, what is that I of loss in this case wanting me to do? What this I desire? Why does it oppress me? Why it is that this I is suggesting me to do? And if we do that, we're gonna get to comprehend that actually we are fornicating our energy in all our centers with every attractive person that we like. We can comprehend how that defect is taking control of us in that moment. We can observe and comprehend how we are forgetting about ourselves and how we are getting identified and how our consciousness is falling asleep. Once we comprehend that is a quit procedure, we are going to eliminate each defect or each detail that we observe and each detail that we have become conscious of. And we are going to ask our individual Divine Mother to eliminate each detail that we observe in each center. The desire that I'm feeling, the thoughts, the actions, what I'm feeling in my sexual center, the attraction, etc. And this is called self-observation. This is the psychological death practice, the ongoing death. But it is also important that we take part of our daily time to reflect on that we want to eliminate. That we take time of our daily time to study, let's say, that bad habit or that way of being which we want to eradicate from us. I know that you all have things that you have already observed on you and that you want to get rid of. And it is important that we take a part of our time to work on that. So we are going to study all the details that make up that way of being. And we are going to reflect with simple questions. We are going to ask ourselves, what is this I making me do? We are going to ask ourselves why. Why am I doing that? We are going to ask ourselves how am I doing that? How am I acting like this? How is this I making me act? When, for example, when did I start doing that? For what? Or why? And actually, with those questions, what, why, how, when, we are going to get to comprehend, and we are going to get to find a lot of details that comprises that that we want to eliminate. Once we are studying, for example, our anger, we are going to find our impatience, we are going to find our frustration, we are going to find there our fear, our pride. We are going to find a lot of details that comprises our anger, for example. And actually, what we need to do while reflecting, eliminate detail by detail until we set completely free from that way of being. So doing these reflections will get us through deep insights, and it will get us to get to know what would be the conscious, what is the conscious way to act, to react, because once we are eliminating the defect, we are going to be discovering and releasing the consciousness. So we will get to know how is the way of acting consciously. And doing this reflection will lead us to really want to eliminate the psychological defects from us, because sometimes we do things, sometimes we can get to realize they are not that good, but we don't have the urge to eliminate that. But once we are reflecting on certain defects, once we get to remember all the times we let that defect manifest, when we get to realize how we have hurt others, how we have hurt ourselves, how our consciousness is trapped in there, how we are being conditioned by that way of being, then a really urge to eliminate that psychological defect will arise, since we will understand how it enslaves and manipulates us, how it constantly feeds on our energy, and how it leads us to make mistakes. And making those comprehensions will lead us to our own self-knowledge, will lead us to get to know ourselves in a deep way and make radical changes in us. And that is the psychological depth. It is very important, because if we work on ourselves, if we get to liberate ourselves from all our wrong ways of being, if we get to liberate all our consciousness, and if we get to awaken our consciousness through this practice, we are going to be able to be free of this physical death, because we, as we are going to see through this course, we are going to be creating ourselves in our interior. We are going to have the material to create the internal bodies that will make us have a representation in the different dimensions, but also that will free ourselves from the second death. And to finish this talk, let's see what dies and what doesn't die along with the death of the physical body. So what dies? Let's see. Along with the physical body, the vital body, which is that energetic body that gives us or that gives energy to our physical body, and the personality dies. Actually, the personality could last a little longer to disintegrate, because much of the time is fed by the people who don't let the dead go by constantly reminding them, crying for them, taking them flowers, talking about them, etc. That is the cause of some famous personalities, usually of very famous people, can manifest for a long time as ghosts. And even some personalities hide in those so-called haunted houses because every time they manage to scare someone, they feed on that energy that they steal from the person who was scared, and that way that ghost can keep wandering for longer. But that is really something gloomy, and the fact of having a wandering personality affects the person at the moment of wanting to free himself of this wheel, at the moment of him wanting to achieve self-realization, because we'll also have to disintegrate that personality. That is why the ideal when a person dies is to cremate them, since this accelerates the process of disintegration of the personality, and that we let the deceased go. Not constantly remember them, but to thank their passage through existence and let them advance freely to their next state. And what doesn't die? Well, the essence or the consciousness of each person is immortal. It is the only real part of us. It never dies. It is a part of God in each of us. Also, the psychological elements in which our essence, which is immortal, is bottled up, return from one existence to another. And in each one of our existences, they become strengthened. So if we do this work of eliminating all our psychological defects, freeing all our consciousness that is currently trapped in our ego by practicing the psychological death, and we make this released energy ascend through our spine with the practice of supersex that we learned in the previous lecture last Sunday. And if we develop conscious love for all humanity by helping them awaken their consciousness, teaching them these three factors of the consciousness revolution, which is ego death, spiritual birth, and sacrifice for humanity, we will reach the purpose of our existence, and death will no longer be able to reach us. We will actually become immortal beings of awakened consciousness, and we will free ourselves from physical death and from second death. And there we will ascend to the higher worlds of consciousness. And this has been today's topic. I hope it has helped you to understand some aspect of death, to understand that death is not something to fear, since it is just as natural as being born. And I hope that it has moved you longing to investigate these things for yourselves. I remind you and invite you to the topic that we will discuss next Sunday, where we will be talking about astral projection. We are going to see everything related to this very important practice, and we will see how we can achieve it. And now, let me see to finish if you have any questions, and if not, let's finish this transmission. Just give me a moment to check here. Well, if at the time of watching at this video you have any question, you can write it down in the comments, and we will be solving all your questions in the chat. See you next Sunday. Bye bye.